A racist CEO humiliates a pregnant black woman at work and secretly tries to push her out of the company. However, he is stunned when the black woman reveals that she has proof of his racist comments about her. Naomi Rivers took a deep breath as she approached the heavy, frosted glass doors of Samuel Blackwood's office. The CEO's corner of the building was a world of its own. Sleek, cold, and luxurious. Just like the man who occupied it. Her hands tightened around the manila folder she carried, though the documents inside weren't the reason for the sudden knots in her stomach. Just breathe, she whispered to herself, steeling her nerves before tapping gently on the door. Come in, came Samuel's voice, cool and detached as always. Naomi pushed the door open and stepped into the office. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a glare over Samuel's polished mahogany desk. He barely glanced up from his computer screen. Naomi, he acknowledged, his tone clipped. What can I do for you? She hesitated, suddenly aware of how small she felt, standing there in front of him. Clearing her throat, she forced herself to speak. I wanted to let you know that I'm pregnant. Samuel's fingers paused briefly over the keyboard, but his face remained impassive. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. His eyes, piercing and calculating, met hers. Pregnant, he repeated, as if testing the word. Well, congratulations, I suppose. Naomi bit the inside of her cheek. His words were polite, but there was no warmth behind them. No genuine acknowledgement of the life-changing news she had just shared. She knew Samuel well enough to sense the shift. A slight crease formed between his eyebrows, barely noticeable, but enough to signal displeasure. How far along are you? He asked, his voice steady, though the question felt more like an evaluation than an inquiry about her health. 4 months, Naomi replied, standing straighter. I've been feeling fine, and I plan to continue working without any interruptions. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line as he tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. Well, of course, your health comes first, he said, his tone laced with something Naomi couldn't quite place. But you know, it can be difficult for women to juggle a pregnancy and a demanding career. These next few months are going to be crucial for the company. We can't afford anyone not performing at their best. Naomi's heart sank. There it was. The thinly veiled insinuation that her pregnancy was a problem, that she wasn't going to be able to pull her weight. She forced herself to stay composed. I'm more than capable of handling my workload, Samuel, she said, her voice even. I haven't let anything slip so far, and I don't plan to. Of course, he replied with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. But these things can change. Priorities shift. I've seen it happen before. It's hard to focus on work when you're, well, expecting. The word stung. She could feel the undercurrent of doubt in everything he said, as if her pregnancy had already lowered her value in his eyes. She wasn't surprised, but it didn't make the moment any less painful. I understand your concerns, Naomi said carefully, choosing her words with precision. But I assure you, my commitment to this job hasn't changed. I'll continue to give my best. Samuel stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, Naomi, we'll see how things go. Just keep me informed. If anything comes up, I need to know immediately. Of course, she replied, her voice steady, though she felt a wave of frustration bubbling inside her. She nodded and turned to leave. But just as her hand touched the door, she heard him speak again. Oh, and Naomi, he added, his voice carrying that same condescending edge. Try not to overdo it. I wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed. She paused, her back to him, eyes closed as she swallowed her anger. Thank you for your concern, Samuel, she managed before exiting the office. As the door clicked shut behind her, Naomi let out a shaky breath. The conversation had gone exactly as she had feared. She had always known Samuel could be dismissive, but now, he didn't even bother to hide it. His words had sounded supportive on the surface, but underneath, they were loaded with doubt, and Naomi knew this was only the beginning. Her mind raced as she walked back to her desk. She was prepared for the workload, for the long hours, and for the physical toll of her pregnancy. But what she hadn't anticipated was the subtle hostility she would face from her own boss, the man she had worked so hard to prove herself to. Naomi sat down, placing the manila folder in front of her, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She had hoped for understanding, maybe even a little support. Instead, she had been met with veiled criticism, and it stung, but she wasn't going to let it stop her. Not now. Naomi sat at her desk, her fingers lightly brushing the keys of her laptop. The office hummed with the usual background noise. Phones ringing, quiet conversations, the occasional sound of footsteps hurrying past. But today, everything felt different. Since her conversation with Samuel Blackwood, a strange tension had settled over her, lingering like a cloud. Just as she was about to dive into the day's tasks, an email from Samuel's office pinged in her inbox. She opened it, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the message. The task was simple: organize files, rearrange schedules, menial work, the kind that barely required thought, let alone the skills of an executive assistant. Naomi frowned. This wasn't her usual workload. Where were the important projects, the high-level meetings she used to coordinate? She quickly scanned her calendar, noticing several of the larger meetings she had been involved in were suddenly reassigned to others. She was being quietly pushed out of critical responsibilities. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, considering a response, but she knew better than to react too quickly. Instead, she hit reply and typed a polite acknowledgement, though her mind was racing. As the day went on, the pattern continued. More emails trickled in. Tasks she'd normally delegate to junior staff members were being piled onto her plate. Meanwhile, her usual duties seemed to be distributed among other assistants, mostly white, who looked surprised when they took over her projects but said nothing. By the afternoon, Naomi was frustrated but determined to stay calm. She wouldn't give Samuel the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Later, in the break room, she overheard a conversation between two of her colleagues. They were discussing a meeting she had once handled regularly, one that had now been assigned to someone else. "I don't get why they took Naomi off it. She's always been solid," one of them said, frowning. "Samuel probably thinks she's got too much on her plate," the other replied, glancing around cautiously. Naomi pretended to busy herself with the coffee machine, biting back her anger. This wasn't about her workload. This was about her pregnancy. Samuel's unspoken decision to quietly push her aside had already started to spread through the office. When she returned to her desk, another email was waiting for her. This time, it was a notice for a departmental meeting she had coordinated for months. But her name was no longer listed as the point of contact. Instead, another assistant was given the lead role. Naomi stared at the screen, her frustration mounting. Samuel wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He was systematically removing her from key responsibilities, but doing it in such a subtle way that it would be hard to prove. He was, after all, just lightening her load, her hand clenched into a fist by her side. It was clear now. Samuel didn't think she could handle her job while being pregnant. Or worse, he didn't want her to. A knock at the door broke her thoughts, and Linda Calloway, the Human Resources Director, entered with her usual expression of detached professionalism. Naomi motioned for her to sit, though she could already feel where this conversation was headed. "Naomi," Linda began, with a tone that indicated she was about to walk a tightrope. "Samuel asked me to check in and see how things are going. We want to make sure you're not feeling overwhelmed with your workload, especially with the pregnancy." Naomi smiled politely, though inside she was seething. "I'm perfectly capable of managing everything, Linda. If anything, my workload has decreased." Linda's eyes flickered briefly with recognition, as if she knew exactly what Naomi was talking about, but chose to ignore it. "Well, if you feel that way, maybe you should have a conversation with Samuel. He only wants to ensure that you're comfortable." "Comfortable," Naomi echoed, her voice tight. "That's not what this is about, and I think we both know that." Linda pursed her lips but said nothing, standing up to leave. "If you ever feel the need to talk, my door is always open." Naomi watched her walk away, knowing full well that no amount of talking would change anything. It was clear where Linda's loyalties lay, and they weren't with her. Naomi sat back in her chair, staring at her inbox, the menial tasks piling up in her queue. The anger burned in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew she couldn't confront Samuel directly yet, not without something more concrete. But as she glanced at the folder beside her desk, she felt the weight of her decision forming. She would document everything, every slight, every reduction in responsibility, every degrading remark. If Samuel thought he could quietly push her out, he was wrong, because Naomi was going to fight back. Naomi could feel the tension mounting. Every day since her meeting with Samuel, the hostility in the office had become more palpable. It wasn't outright. No one was yelling or openly discriminating against her, but the signs were there. Subtle, deliberate shifts in her responsibilities continued, and she found herself being sidelined in almost every project. She had documented everything so far, but it felt like she was losing the war of attrition. And then, today, things took a turn. It started like any other day. Naomi arrived at the office, settled at her desk, and prepared to tackle the endless pile of menial tasks Samuel had dumped on her. As she clicked through her emails, she noticed something peculiar. One of the larger projects she used to handle, the one that had been reassigned, was mentioned in an email thread she had accidentally been CC'd on. Her name was nowhere in the conversation, but her absence was glaring. She knew she should have been leading that project. Anger simmered beneath her calm exterior, but she kept her face neutral as she read through the emails. Samuel's new favorite assistant, Rachel, was now in charge, and it was clear she was being groomed for a larger role. How convenient, Naomi muttered under her breath, closing the thread. After an hour of mindless data entry, Naomi stood up to stretch. She needed to clear her head, so she decided to walk down to the break room for some water. As she rounded the corner near the conference rooms, she heard voices. Samuel's voice and the deep rumble of another executive she vaguely recognized. Their conversation caught her attention, not because of the topic, but because of the tone. She's a liability, I'm telling you, Samuel was saying, his voice dripping with frustration. I knew this would happen. We hire someone like her, and then this pregnancy nonsense. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She stopped just outside the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she shouldn't be eavesdropping, but she couldn't help it. She needed to hear this. The other executive chuckled, his voice low and mocking. What did you expect? These people, they're always looking for some kind of excuse. And now with the kid, it'll only get worse. She'll probably be out half the time, and God knows where the father is. Probably not even around. Naomi's blood ran cold. They knew nothing about her or her husband. Samuel laughed softly in response. Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm not trying to sound harsh, but I should have known better than to put her in that position. It's going to be a nightmare when she can't keep up. We'll have to find someone else anyway. This was a mistake from the start. Naomi felt her entire body tense with rage. These people. The implication that she was incapable, not because of her work, but because of who she was. The disgusting assumption that her child wouldn't have a father. It was vile, racist, and infuriating. She bit her lip, struggling to control her breathing. She had always known Samuel harbored these thoughts, but hearing them spoken aloud made it so much worse. The weight of their condescension and bigotry pressed down on her, suffocating her in that moment. The voices continued, but Naomi couldn't bear to hear any more. She backed away quietly, her hands shaking as she walked back toward her desk, her mind racing. Her carefully built resolve was crumbling. All of the quiet mistreatment, the microaggressions, had now turned into something far uglier. Back at her desk, Naomi sat down, her heart still pounding. She stared blankly at her computer screen, Samuel's words echoing in her mind. These people, oh father, Naomi's hands clenched. Jason, her husband, was serving his country overseas. He wasn't here, but his love and support had been unwavering. These men had no idea what they were talking about. She wanted to confront him right then and there. She wanted to storm into his office and throw every insult he'd ever made back in his face, but she couldn't, not yet. Instead, she opened her personal email and added a new note to the evidence folder. She detailed everything she had just overheard, typing furiously as the memory of Samuel's laughter burned in her mind. Her fingers shook with fury as she wrote, "Overheard Samuel Blackwood in the conference room. Implied my pregnancy is a liability. Executive colleagues suggested I have no husband." Both laughed, documenting as evidence for discrimination lawsuit. When she was done, Naomi sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of what she had just recorded. She couldn't stay silent anymore. It was time to take action, but first, she needed to collect more. They wouldn't see it coming. She would use their arrogance against them. Her resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her unborn child, the child they had insulted without a second thought, and she would make sure Samuel paid for every vile thing he'd said. Soon, she thought. Soon, this will all come crashing down around them. The following week was a blur of anger, frustration, and cold determination. Naomi continued to come to work each day, meticulously recording every slight, every inappropriate comment, every piece of work that was reassigned or taken from her without reason. She had compiled an impressive file by now, and the growing list of grievances was both sobering and empowering. Samuel's arrogance was his undoing, and Naomi knew it was only a matter of time before she struck back. But today was different. Today, Naomi felt the full weight of her situation come crashing down. It began with another menial task dropped on her desk by Rachel, Samuel's new favorite. The younger woman offered a half-hearted smile as she handed Naomi a stack of papers to file, as though she was doing her a favor. Naomi watched her walk away, feeling the familiar mix of frustration and disbelief. It wasn't Rachel's fault. She was just another tool in Samuel's game, but it still stung to be treated like she was invisible. She set the papers aside, ready to continue her day in silence, when Samuel's voice rang out from the other end of the office. "Naomi, can I see you in my office for a minute?" Naomi rose from her chair slowly, trying to suppress the wave of dread that had become all too familiar. She grabbed her notebook, one she had been using to document everything, and walked toward his office. her stomach knotting tighter with each step. The moment she stepped inside, she could tell something was off. Samuel sat behind his desk, his face unreadable, but his posture was tense. Linda Calloway, the HR director, stood next to him, arms crossed, a strained expression on her face. Naomi's heart began to race. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. "Close the door, please," Samuel said. His tone clipped. Naomi did as she was told and sat down, keeping her expression neutral, though her nerves were buzzing with anxiety. "We need to talk about your performance," Samuel began, cutting straight to the point. "We've noticed a pattern of missed deadlines and unfinished tasks. This can't continue." Naomi stared at him, her jaw tightening. "What deadlines exactly?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside she was seething. Samuel leaned back in his chair, feigning a concerned look. "Well, for instance, the presentation you were supposed to put together last week wasn't completed. Rachel had to step in." Naomi felt her blood boil. "The presentation I wasn't even informed about? The one Rachel was assigned before I ever got the chance?" Samuel's face remained calm, but there was a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Naomi, I understand that things might be difficult right now with your situation, but we can't let personal matters affect your work." Naomi's fists clenched under the table. "My situation? You mean my pregnancy?" Linda shifted awkwardly in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but she didn't intervene. "Naomi," Samuel continued, his tone condescending, "I want to be clear. We are trying to support you through this, but we need you to meet the standards required for your role. If you can't, we'll need to consider alternative solutions." Alternative solutions. The words hit her like a slap in the face. This wasn't about her performance. It never had been. Samuel was pushing her out, 1 inch at a time, under the guise of concern for her ability to do her job. Naomi's vision blurred with fury, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had prepared for this. She had been documenting every move, every comment, but hearing it laid out so bluntly still hurt. "Let me be clear," Naomi said, her voice low but filled with simmering anger. "My performance hasn't slipped. You've systematically taken away my responsibilities and then blamed me for not completing tasks I wasn't even given." Samuel's eyes darkened, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's not how we see it." Naomi leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but cold. "You're trying to force me out because I'm pregnant. You've undermined my position at every turn, reassigned my work, and now you're pretending I'm the one who's failing." Samuel's smile was tight, forced. "Naomi, no one is forcing you out. But if you continue to fall short—" "I'm not falling short," she snapped, unable to hold back any longer. "You are, you and your entire mindset. I've recorded every insult, every time you undermined me, and every instance of discrimination. I have enough to take you to court, and you know I'll win." For the first time, Samuel's expression faltered. His face hardened, the mask slipping for just a second as he realized the gravity of her words. "You think you can threaten me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's not a threat," Naomi replied calmly, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "It's a promise. I'm done tolerating this. I'm done being treated like I don't belong here. And if you think for a second that you can push me out, you're wrong. I'm going to fight, and I will win." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Linda looked between them, unsure of what to say, but she remained seated, clearly unwilling to intervene. Naomi stood, straightening her shoulders. "I'll be in touch through my lawyer from now on." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the office, her heart pounding in her chest, but her mind clear. She had finally said it. She had drawn her line in the sand. There was no going back now. The fight had officially begun. Naomi strode out of Samuel's office with her head held high, her pulse racing. She had finally stood up to him. Every nerve in her body was on edge, but she felt a strange calm as well, a certainty that she had done the right thing. There was no turning back now. As she walked down the hallway toward her desk, she heard the heavy clack of footsteps behind her. Samuel's voice, sharp and angry, cut through the office noise. "Naomi!" he called out, his tone far different from the calm, controlled demeanor he had shown in the meeting. She stopped in her tracks, slowly turning to face him. His face was red with barely restrained fury, and for a brief moment, she could see the mask of professionalism slip completely. Several employees nearby glanced up from their desks, their eyes wide with curiosity as they sensed the tension in the air. Samuel stormed toward her, his voice rising as he closed the distance. "You think you can just walk out like that? Threaten me? I've done everything I can to accommodate you, and this is how you repay me?" Naomi stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Accommodate me?" You've done nothing but undermine me since the moment I told you I was pregnant. This isn't about accommodation, Samuel. And you know it." Her words only seemed to fuel his rage. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low hiss, though it was loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You think you're special? You think you deserve some kind of special treatment because you're pregnant?" He sneered, the contempt in his eyes unmistakable. "You women come in here, act like you're indispensable, and the second things get tough, you want to play the victim card." Naomi's jaw clenched, but she remained silent, letting him dig his own grave. She had expected some kind of pushback, but she hadn't expected him to lose control like this, in front of everyone. Samuel's voice grew louder, his words venomous. "You probably don't even know who the father is, do you? That's how it usually goes, isn't it? You get knocked up, and suddenly it's everyone else's problem." The office fell into an eerie silence. Naomi felt the eyes of her colleagues on her, but she barely registered them. Her focus was entirely on Samuel, on the ugliness pouring out of him. The words hit her like a punch, and for a moment, the room spun. But instead of backing down, Naomi stood taller, her resolve hardening like steel. Samuel wasn't finished. He pointed a finger at her, his face twisted with hatred. "I should have known better than to trust someone like you. You people are all the same, always looking for a way to take advantage, always ready to cry discrimination when things don't go your way." Naomi's vision blurred with rage, but she didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just stared at him, her eyes burning into his as he continued his tirade. "You don't belong here," Samuel spat, his voice seething with venom. "This is a place for professionals, not someone like you. I've carried you long enough. You've been nothing but a burden. And now you want to play the victim. Well, I'm done." The silence in the office was deafening. Naomi could feel her co-workers' shock, their disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Samuel's outburst had been public, loud, and undeniably racist. There was no going back from this. Naomi took a deep breath, her voice calm but laced with fury. "Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are, Samuel," she said, her voice carrying across the office, sharp and clear. "I won't tolerate this anymore. You've just made sure that I have everything I need to win this lawsuit. And believe me, I will." Samuel's face twisted in rage, but there was nothing more he could say. His anger had already revealed everything. Naomi turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in front of the entire office, exposed for what he truly was. As she walked toward the elevator, she could feel the eyes of her co-workers on her, but she didn't care. The air felt different now. She had finally drawn the line, and Samuel had crossed it in a way that he could never undo. The fight was far from over, but Naomi knew one thing for sure. Samuel Blackwood had just sealed his own fate. Naomi stood outside the building, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. The weight of Samuel's words clung to her like a suffocating cloud, but alongside the anger, there was also a strange sense of clarity. His outburst had laid everything bare. He had revealed himself in front of the entire office, and there would be no covering this up now. She took a deep breath of the cool air, steadying herself as she pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number she had been saving for weeks. "Marcus Shaw," came the voice on the other end, calm and professional. "Mr. Shaw, this is Naomi Rivers," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I need to move forward with the case." There was a brief pause. "I remember you, Ms. Rivers. We discussed your situation a few weeks ago. Have you gathered all the evidence we talked about?" "I've got everything," Naomi replied, her confidence growing. "And after today, I have something even better." Samuel Blackwood just had a public racist outburst in the middle of the office. Everyone heard it. He crossed every line. "That's significant," Marcus said, his tone shifting as he realized the magnitude of her statement. "If we handle this right, it could be a very strong case. Have you documented the incident?" "Yes," Naomi said, her voice cold with determination. "And there are witnesses. Plenty of them." "Good. I want you to write down every detail while it's still fresh in your mind, including the exact words he used. We'll need statements from your colleagues as well. If they're willing to testify, it will make the case even stronger." Naomi nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'll do that. We'll meet tomorrow to go over everything and file the lawsuit officially," Marcus said. "I'll start preparing the paperwork on my end." Samuel Blackwood's going to regret ever thinking he could get away with this. Naomi hung up, her pulse still racing but her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The lawsuit was no longer just an idea or a vague possibility. It was happening, and this time, she had everything she needed to win. The next morning, Naomi sat in Marcus Shaw's office, going over the details of the case. She had spent hours the night before writing down every word, every gesture, every sneer that Samuel had thrown at her. Marcus sat across from her, carefully reviewing the files she had compiled over the past weeks. "This is good," Marcus said, tapping the folder. "You've been meticulous. Between your documentation and the witnesses to his outburst, we've got more than enough to proceed. Naomi nodded. I'm ready. Just be aware, Marcus cautioned. This is going to get ugly. Samuel isn't going to roll over easily. He'll fight back, and he'll try to discredit you. But if we stay the course, we'll win. I know, Naomi said quietly but firmly. I've been dealing with this for months. I'm not backing down now. Marcus looked at her, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Good, then let's get to work. By the end of the day, the lawsuit had been officially filed. Naomi sat in her apartment that evening, staring at the papers on her kitchen table. The legal documents were a formal declaration of the battle that lay ahead. Samuel Blackwood would soon receive the notice, and there was no doubt in Naomi's mind that he would come out swinging, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Her phone buzzed with a notification, and she glanced down to see an email from a coworker, someone who had witnessed Samuel's outburst the previous day. The subject line read, I'll testify. Naomi exhaled in relief, her resolve only strengthening. One by one, people were starting to come forward, willing to stand with her against Samuel. He had alienated and intimidated so many, but now, his arrogance was finally catching up to him. For the first time in weeks, Naomi allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She had taken the first real step toward justice, and now it was Samuel's turn to face the consequences of his actions. The fight had just begun, but Naomi was ready for it. Naomi sat in the cafe, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and saw a message from Samuel Blackwood. We need to talk. Urgent. She couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. After weeks of building her case and preparing for battle, Samuel was finally feeling the pressure. He had ignored her, underestimated her, and humiliated her. Now, with the lawsuit looming over him, he was the one scrambling for a way out. Naomi's phone rang again. This time, it was Samuel calling directly. She debated letting it go to voicemail but decided to answer. She wanted to hear what he had to say. Hello, Naomi? Samuel's voice was tense, edged with desperation. We need to talk. This lawsuit, it's getting out of hand. We should settle this before things go too far. Naomi's lips curled into a small smile. Go too far. The irony wasn't lost on her. I think it's exactly where it needs to be, Samuel, she replied, her voice steady and controlled. He sighed audibly, and she could hear the tension in his voice. Look, let's meet. We don't need lawyers involved. We can work something out between us. Make this go away. I'm willing to make things right. Naomi paused. She already knew what his offer would be. Money. He thought he could buy his way out of this, but she was curious to see just how far he was willing to go. Fine, she said. Let's meet. An hour later, Naomi found herself sitting across from Samuel in a quiet, upscale restaurant. He looked tense, his usually confident demeanor slipping. His eyes darted around the room, and his forced smile only confirmed how desperate he truly was. Naomi, he began, trying to keep his tone calm. I'm glad you agreed to meet. I think we can both agree that this lawsuit is unnecessary. It's going to be a mess. For you, for me, for everyone involved. It's not worth the trouble. Naomi crossed her arms, staring at him with cool detachment. Not worth the trouble? For you, maybe. But I'm not the one facing the fallout here, Samuel. You are. He leaned forward, his voice dropping as if they were discussing some secret deal. Look, I made mistakes. I'm willing to admit that. I said things I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry for that. But dragging this into court? It's not going to end well for either of us. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You think I'm the one who's going to lose here? You insulted me, humiliated me, and openly displayed your racism in front of the entire office. Trust me, Samuel. I'm going to win this lawsuit. Samuel's jaw clenched, but he forced a strained smile. Let's be reasonable. What do you want? Money? I can offer you a generous settlement, more than you'd ever see in court. You and your child can live comfortably, without the stress of a public battle. Let's handle this quietly. Naomi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You think you can buy me off? Let me make something very clear, Samuel. I'm going to get much more money when I win this lawsuit. And it's not just about the payout. This is about your reputation. When the details of this case go public, everyone will know exactly who you are and how you run your company. Samuel's face paled, his confident facade cracking. Naomi, you don't want to ruin your own career over this. If this goes to court, the media will be all over it. Do you really want to be known as the woman who dragged her employer to court over a few words? Naomi laughed, shaking her head. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about a few words. This is about your systematic mistreatment of me from the moment I told you I was pregnant. It's about the racism, the sexism, and the sheer arrogance you've displayed every step of the way. She leaned back in her chair, her voice calm but cutting. You're offering me money to stay quiet, but that's not going to work. I'm going to win this lawsuit, and when I do, I'll get much more than just a financial settlement. Your company's reputation will be in tatters, and everyone will know the truth about how you treat your employees. Samuel's face twisted with frustration. You don't understand what you're doing, he snapped, his voice rising. You think this is going to make you a hero? No one's going to care, Naomi. You'll just be another disgruntled employee trying to make a scene. Naomi shook her head slowly. You're wrong, Samuel. People will care. And more importantly, the courts will care. I have the evidence. I have the witnesses. You can try to spin this any way you want, but in the end, you'll lose. Samuel slumped back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, his desperation clear. So that's it? You're really going to push this all the way? Naomi met his gaze with unwavering resolve. Yes, and when I win, you'll not only lose your money, but your reputation will be destroyed. This is happening, Samuel. You can't stop it. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, thick with the reality of what was coming. Samuel had lost control, and he knew it. Naomi stood, gathering her things. I'll see you in court. With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Samuel behind to face the consequences of his actions. He had tried to buy his way out, to manipulate and intimidate her into silence. But Naomi had stood her ground. And now, it was only a matter of time before justice was served. Samuel Blackwood was about to lose everything, and Naomi was going to make sure of it. The day Naomi had been preparing for finally arrived. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with low murmurs as people filed into their seats. The scent of polished wood and paper filled the air, but to Naomi, the atmosphere felt thick and tense, as though everyone knew something significant was about to unfold. As Naomi sat at the plaintiff's table, she felt the absence of husband Jason beside her. If he weren't stationed overseas, she knew he would be here, supporting her every step of the way. But even from afar, he had been her strength throughout this fight. She sat at the plaintiff's table next to Marcus Shaw, her lawyer, who was flipping through his notes with calm precision. Naomi tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting to the past months. Everything she had endured, everything that had led to this moment. Across the room, Samuel Blackwood sat at the defense table, his lawyer whispering something to him. Gone was the confident, untouchable CEO she once knew. He looked rattled, pale, and much older than she remembered, his face tight with stress. The sound of the gavel brought the room to order. All rise, the court clerk announced as the judge entered. The entire room stood, and Naomi could feel the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. When the judge took his seat, the trial officially began. Marcus leaned over to Naomi, his voice low but firm. This is it. Just stay calm, and we'll let the facts speak for themselves. We've got this. Naomi nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She had been waiting for this day for so long, and now it was here. She couldn't afford to let her nerves get the best of her. She had to stay focused. As the proceedings began, Samuel's lawyer, a man with a smooth voice and practiced smile, tried to paint the lawsuit as a misunderstanding. He attempted to downplay Samuel's behavior, making it sound like Naomi had misinterpreted his actions as malicious when they were simply business decisions. He spoke about Naomi's pregnancy, implying that perhaps she had become emotional, that she had taken things too personally. But Naomi knew Marcus was prepared for this. When it was his turn, he stood confidently and began laying out the facts in a calm, methodical way. He presented the timeline of events with precision. Naomi's announcement of her pregnancy, the sudden changes in her workload, and how her responsibilities were quietly stripped away without explanation. He showed how Samuel's behavior had grown more demeaning with time, culminating in the racist outburst that had been witnessed by multiple employees. This isn't a case of misunderstanding, Marcus said, addressing the courtroom. This is a case of systematic discrimination, racial, gender-based, and targeted at a woman who was vulnerable because of her pregnancy. This is about power being abused, plain and simple. Naomi watched as he moved through the evidence she had so painstakingly documented over the past months. Every email, every task reassignment, every inappropriate comment she had recorded was laid out in front of the court. Samuel's lawyer tried to object several times, attempting to dismiss certain pieces of evidence. But Marcus was relentless. He pushed back, and each time the judge overruled the defense's objections. When Marcus called witnesses to the stand, the tension in the room shifted. Naomi's former co-workers testified one by one, recounting the things they had seen and heard. Some were more hesitant than others, clearly nervous about going against the CEO of their company, but the truth was undeniable. They confirmed that Naomi had been treated differently after announcing her pregnancy. They described how Samuel had belittled her in front of others, how she had been removed from important projects, And finally, how they had all heard his racist outburst. "I was there," one of Naomi's colleagues testified, her voice trembling slightly but steady. He said, "You people are all the same. I remember it because it shocked me. I didn't know what to say at the time." Naomi felt a surge of gratitude toward her co-workers who had stepped up. She knew it wasn't easy for them to testify against Samuel, but their courage was giving her case the strength it needed. Then came the pivotal moment. Marcus played the recording Naomi had made during her private meeting with Samuel, the day everything had come to a head. The courtroom fell into an almost eerie silence as Samuel's voice filled the air. "You people are all the same," his voice sneered through the recording. "I should have known better than to trust someone like you." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine, even though she had heard the recording countless times before. The words hung in the air, and there was no mistaking their meaning, no way to spin them as anything other than what they were. Pure, unapologetic racism. The judge's face remained impassive, but Naomi could sense the weight of the evidence taking its toll. The room seemed to shift after that, as if everyone present could feel that the tide had turned. When it was time for Naomi to take the stand, Marcus gave her an encouraging nod. She stood and made her way to the witness box, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, but her resolve stronger than ever. She took a deep breath as she raised her hand to be sworn in, and once she was seated, Marcus began his questions. "Naomi," he started gently, "can you describe for the court how your work environment changed after you announced your pregnancy?" Naomi met his gaze and then looked toward the judge, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. "After I told Samuel that I was pregnant, everything changed. My responsibilities were taken away from me. I was given tasks that were beneath my position. I was cut out of meetings and decisions that I had previously been a part of. It was clear that Samuel no longer valued me as an employee." "And how did that make you feel?" Marcus asked, giving her the space to voice her experience. "It made me feel invisible," Naomi said quietly but firmly, "like I wasn't worth anything to him anymore. Like I was a burden, just because I was having a child. It wasn't just about my pregnancy. It was about the fact that I'm a black woman in a company where I was already one of the few in a position of responsibility." When Samuel made those comments, it wasn't just disrespect. It was discrimination. Marcus nodded, satisfied. He stepped back, allowing Naomi's words to sink in. The defense had little to counter with. Their attempts to discredit her testimony fell flat, especially in the face of the overwhelming evidence Marcus had presented. The closing arguments were brief, with Samuel's lawyer attempting one final time to frame the events as nothing more than unfortunate misunderstandings. But it was clear that the courtroom wasn't buying it. When the judge called for a recess before delivering the verdict, Naomi sat in tense silence, her heart pounding. The weight felt excruciating, every second stretching on as she tried to focus on breathing evenly. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned, and everyone stood as he took his seat. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Naomi Rivers," the judge said, his voice steady but firm. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She had won. It took a moment for the reality to sink in, but when it did, relief washed over her like a tidal wave. The judge continued, awarding her a substantial financial settlement, far more than Samuel had ever offered during his desperate attempts to make her drop the suit. More importantly, the court ordered a full investigation into workplace discrimination at Samuel's company, ensuring that his actions would be scrutinized and made public. Samuel sat at the defense table, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. He had lost, and the consequences were just beginning. Naomi stood slowly, her legs still shaking, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. She turned to Marcus, who gave her a quiet, satisfied nod. "You did it," he said softly. "No," Naomi corrected with a smile. "We did it." As they left the courtroom, the weight that had pressed down on Naomi for so long finally began to lift. She had fought back against Samuel Blackwood, against the injustice and discrimination she had faced, and she had won. It wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had been made to feel small. Naomi walked out of that courtroom with her head held high, ready for the next chapter of her life, knowing that she had stood up for herself and changed her future for the better. It had only been a few days since the court ruling, but the ripple effects of the case were already making waves across the company and beyond. Naomi hadn't expected the media attention to be quite so intense, but Samuel Blackwood's downfall had drawn the attention of more than just the business community. News outlets had picked up on the story. Headlines like "CEO faces major defeat in discrimination lawsuit" and "Woman wins landmark case against corporate giant" were plastered across news feeds and social media. Naomi sat in her modest apartment, surrounded by boxes. She hadn't yet moved into her new house, though she had the keys in hand. It felt strange, knowing she could finally leave this place, this chapter of her life behind. The quiet of her living room was occasionally broken by the buzzing of her phone. Well-wishers, former colleagues, and even strangers were reaching out, offering support and congratulations. Some were just curious, but others wanted to share their own stories, thanking her for standing up to Samuel and fighting back. Naomi scrolled through the messages, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief. It wasn't about the attention. She had never wanted that, but hearing how her actions had inspired others felt like a quiet, personal victory. People were seeing her as more than just a victim. They saw her as someone who had changed things, if even just a little. But the victory had come with its own set of challenges. The media scrutiny wasn't always kind. She had seen the comments online, the ones doubting her motives, accusing her of being greedy or just trying to ruin a powerful man. She had expected that, but it still stung. She had told herself she wouldn't engage, wouldn't let it get to her, but some of the words lingered in her mind late at night. She got what she wanted. Money, of course. Why do women always play the victim card? Naomi shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. She had done what was right, what was necessary, not just for herself, but for her son. And now, it was time to move forward, to let the noise fade into the background. A knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she found Linda Calloway, the former HR director of the company, standing on the other side. Linda looked different, more hesitant than Naomi had ever seen her. "Naomi," Linda said, offering a tentative smile. "I hope I'm not intruding." Naomi was surprised to see her but motioned for her to come inside. "No, it's fine. Come in." Linda stepped into the apartment, glancing around awkwardly before sitting on the edge of the couch. She clasped her hands in her lap, her expression uncertain. I wanted to come by and talk to you," Linda said after a long pause. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened." Naomi sat across from her, folding her arms. "About what?" she asked, though she had a pretty good idea. Linda sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I should have done more. Back then, when all of this started, I knew what was happening, but I didn't stand up for you. I didn't fight for you the way I should have. And now, seeing everything come out in court, I can't stop thinking about how I could have made a difference." Naomi studied her for a moment, not sure how to respond. Linda had been a bystander through it all, someone who had the power to step in and stop Samuel's behavior, but had chosen not to. It had been easier for her to stay quiet, to let things unfold without challenging the system, and in doing so, she had become part of the problem. "I appreciate you coming here," Naomi said slowly, "but you could have made a difference back then, Linda. You saw what was happening, and you chose to stay silent." Linda nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know. I was afraid. Of Samuel, of losing my job, of making waves. And I know that doesn't excuse it. I don't know. I thought if I stayed out of it, it wouldn't affect me. But now I see that it does." Naomi let out a slow breath, the weight of everything settling between them. "What's done is done. You can't change the past, but what you do from now on matters." Linda looked up at her, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I want to do better. I don't want to stand by anymore. I've left the company, and I'm trying to find a way to make up for the part I played in all of this. I wanted you to know that." Naomi nodded, though part of her still felt the sting of betrayal. "I hope you do," she said simply. "People like you, people who are in positions of power, you can't be silent, not when people are being mistreated." "I know," Linda said quietly. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a few moments before Linda finally stood up to leave. Naomi walked her to the door, offering a brief but genuine smile. "Take care, Linda. You too, Naomi. And oh, congratulations. You deserved that win." After Linda left, Naomi felt a strange sense of closure. She hadn't expected Linda to show up at her door, but the conversation had given her a moment to reflect. She had spent so much time fighting for herself, for her son, for justice, and now she could feel the weight beginning to lift. She had won, she had made a difference, and even those who had stayed silent were starting to realize the impact of their inaction. As the sun began to set, Naomi stood in the center of her apartment, surrounded by boxes, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Tomorrow she would move into her new home and start the next chapter of her life. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to be proud of everything she had accomplished. The future was wide open, and for the first time in months, Naomi felt ready to embrace it. A few months later, the late afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the nursery window, casting a golden glow across the room. Naomi stood by the crib, gently rocking her newborn son in her arms, the peacefulness of the moment enveloping her like a warm embrace. It had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges in recent months. But here, in this quiet space, everything felt right. She had finally found her peace. The nursery was perfect. Soft cream walls, hand-painted stars and clouds above the crib, and a mobile spinning gently in the breeze. The house itself was a symbol of her victory, a place she had earned through her perseverance and strength. But standing there with her baby in her arms, Naomi knew there was one more piece missing to make this new life complete. She heard the front door open softly, and her heart leapt. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued to rock her son, knowing that in a few moments, the man she had longed to see would walk through the door. The anticipation had been building for weeks, but she had told herself to be patient. Now, though, the wait was over. The sound of heavy boots on the wooden floor grew closer. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She felt it in her chest, the connection that had kept her strong throughout the trials, the loneliness, and the fight. Then, the footsteps paused at the door to the nursery. Naomi turned slowly, and there he was. Jason, her husband, standing in his military uniform, his face a mixture of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming emotion. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, unable to speak. Jason's eyes filled with tears as he took in the sight of Naomi holding their son. He looked different, more weathered, his face marked by the months spent overseas, but he was still the man she had loved through everything. His gaze moved from Naomi's face to the baby cradled in her arms, and that was when the tears finally spilled over. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice cracking as he stepped into the room. "I'm home." Naomi couldn't hold back any longer. Tears blurred her vision as she closed the distance between them, still holding their baby close. "Jason," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You're really here." Jason reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek, before his hand rested on their son's tiny head. "I'm here," he repeated softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I'm never leaving again." Naomi let out a shaky breath, the weight of all the months they had spent apart finally lifting. She had endured so much while he was away, the battles with her boss, the lawsuit, the pregnancy, the birth. But through it all, Jason had been her anchor, even from a distance. They had survived it together, even when miles of ocean had separated them. Jason gently stroked the baby's cheek, his expression softening as he took in their son for the first time. "He's beautiful," Jason whispered, his voice full of awe. "I miss so much. I didn't even know if I'd make it back in time." "You're here now," Naomi said, her voice trembling with love. "That's all that matters." Jason leaned down and kissed her, a long, tender kiss, filled with all the words they hadn't spoken, all the emotions they had held back during his time away. When they broke apart, he wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them close, as if he never wanted to let go. For the first time in what felt like forever, Naomi felt whole. Jason's arms around her, his warmth, his presence, it was everything she had longed for, everything she had fought for. Together, they had made it through the darkest of times. And now they had a future to look forward to, a future they would build together. They stood like that for a long time, their son nestled between them, the room filled with the quiet sounds of his gentle breathing. The world outside seemed far away, and all that mattered in this moment was that they were together. Jason finally pulled back slightly, his eyes searching Naomi's face. "I heard about everything you went through," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here to help." Naomi shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks again. "You were there, Jason. You kept me strong. Every phone call, every letter. You gave me the strength to keep going. I couldn't have done it without you." Jason's eyes softened. "I never doubted you. Not for a second. You're the strongest person I know, Naomi." She smiled through her tears. "I had to be. For him," she said, looking down at their baby, who was still peacefully sleeping in her arms. "And for you." Jason's eyes glistened with pride as he kissed her forehead. "We're going to give him a good life," he promised. "We're going to be the family we always dreamed of." Naomi nodded, her heart swelling with love. "We will." They spent the next few hours together, Jason holding their son for the first time, his eyes never leaving the baby's face as he rocked him gently. Naomi watched, her heart full as she saw the love in Jason's eyes, the deep connection already forming between father and son. She had missed seeing him like this, gentle, caring, protective. And now, they could begin their new life together as a family. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat on the porch, their son wrapped in a soft blanket, fast asleep in Jason's arms. The world outside was peaceful, quiet, as if reflecting the calm Naomi finally felt in her heart. This was her life now. No more battles to fight, No more obstacles to overcome, just love, peace, and the future stretched out before them. Jason looked down at the baby, then up at Naomi, his eyes filled with emotion. "We made it," he said softly. Naomi smiled, reaching out to touch his hand. "Yes, we did." For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to let go of all the fear, the anger, and the pain that had weighed on her for so long. She had fought for this moment, for this life, and now, with Jason by her side and their son in his arms, she knew it had all been worth it. This was their new beginning. Together, they were finally home.